As a yoga teacher, it's likely you've seen this type of transition as your students struggle to make their way to the top of the mat. Now, as a teacher, you likely want to assist your students with transitions, but you just might not be sure how to actually do that. How do I help them without having to give them a totally individual correction? Maybe that's not possible in the class setting. Now, I have found that this one very simple technique works for everyone, whether you're wanting to float to the top of the mat, just simply walk, whether you have long, lengthened, flexible hamstrings, or you are very, very tight. This type of transition is very, very useful to create a seamless movement from downward dog into a standing forward fold. So the main reason why we see this type of clomping to the top of the mat is because there is no movement in the hips. The hips stay stationary, and either you have to have really, really, really long arms and really, really, really short legs to make that work, or else the hamstrings have to be insanely flexible in order to bring the feet underneath the body without stomping them forward. Now, since we want to get movement through the hips, it's really important that we emphasize that movement and where it's coming from. So what I have found to work really, really well is to first instruct lifting high onto the toes. Now, this can be done with the feet any distance apart, and it can be done with any degree of bend or extension in the knees. So once the heels have lifted, one foot flexes. Now, generally what you see people doing is they're just stepping the foot forward, but again, they're stuck. So what we want to get them to do is when that foot flexes, they lift and tip the hip up in order to make room for the foot to come underneath the body. And the same thing happens on the other side. Foot flexes, lift, tilt. It's like a little waddle to the top of the mat. At some point, they might need to come up onto the tips of the fingers. Again, toe lifts, hip lifts, foot comes forward. Maybe they're up onto blocks, or they might even have the hands on the knees or the palms into prayer. Hip lifts, foot lifts, step forward. Hip lifts, foot lifts, step forward. And then there they are into their forward fold at the top of the mat. I found this transition to work so well for a variety of reasons. It works well for the person whose hamstrings are pretty tight. It works well for the person who doesn't have a great proportion in order to walk the legs under, meaning the legs are very long and maybe the arms are short in comparison. And it also works for someone who would like to build up the strength for something like a float. And the reason why that is because it requires a pressing and a bounding energy as you lift the foot and bring the leg forward. So try this out with your students, this waddling to the top of the mat. It is super effective in order to allow your students to feel like this transition is a lot more smooth, a lot more seamless, and it makes them feel more confident. It makes them feel that this is an accessible practice that they are successful within, and therefore it makes your job as a teacher a lot more impactful and a lot more positive to help them with their yoga transformation journey.